I think local food is really important. It means having a great time growing and cooking it with your own family or your friends. It means meeting new people. It means helping you think about the spaces around you and that they don't have to be bits of grass, they could be food.
If people understand where their food has come from, they will take much more notice about what they're eating.
I just really want everyone to be able to eat the sort of food that I ate and that my mother cooked when I was a child, really. I want to share that with as many people as possible.
You make possible the livings of farmers and growers and cheesemakers and milk producers. And you are saying something very profound about how you want the land around you to be used.
If we are going to create a sustainable and resilient food system in the future, we have to start supporting and sourcing much more of our food from closer to us and supporting the kind of farmers who are struggling to survive at the moment.
Local food is more than just about the distance between the cook and the field where the food is grown. It's about the connection that you feel with the people and the trust that you feel for the person who grew the food.
This growing understanding that food really matters, that if you don't care about your food and you don't care about where it comes from, then you are really screwing up the planet, because how you eat, how you shop, it crucially affects how the world is. In the 80s and 90s, supermarkets were becoming these enormous monoliths. Centralised buying, centralised distribution, and if you were a small producer and you couldn't meet those criteria, then you were out of the equation. There's a heavy culture of whatever is cheapest is best.
It's vitally important that we don't let those big four dominate the scene, because if they do, all the choices are their choices, not our choices. And I think that's absolutely vital about the independent sector. They leave us with a choice. Otherwise, basically, it's somebody working for shareholders who's choosing what we eat.
The supermarket culture and the globalized buying lock in together, and you get some pretty dire environmental results from that kind of food system. Water shortages, oil shortages, the sense of an environment that is being affected by how we produce our food. And governments have had this leave it to Tesco policy, and I don't just mean Tesco, I mean leave it to the supermarkets. And it's going to take a lot of effort to shift its course.
We've forgotten about the importance of the land and the soil and things that grow from it. 80% of us live in cities, and we've had generations who have been detached from getting the soil under their fingertips. We've had generations who are used to going to a supermarket and buying things out of a packet, and just being accustomed to it flying halfway over the globe.
We've been farming organically at Riverford since 1986. It all started with me really with a loathing of dealing with supermarkets. I felt it was a very dehumanising experience. The distance as a grower between you and the supermarket shelf is about as far as it can go. And here we were growing this wonderful produce that we wanted to share with people, so it was it was born out of desperation, really. Back in the early 90s, there were a lot of fairly pioneering growers around the countryside. A local grower very near here came up with a bright idea. A vegetable box scheme seemed completely ridiculous to me. I never thought it would work. I thought I'd try packing a few very simple, basic vegetable boxes back in 1993. I did all the deliveries myself. The enthusiasm people felt for what it tasted like rather than just what it looked like. And they wanted to know, what was in season. They wanted to know how it was grown. It does actually meet that need that people have to know where their food is coming from and who's producing it. Initially, 30 a week on a very small scale and delivered out of the back of my car. We're now packing over 40,000 deliveries a week. I mean, we will produce as much as we can locally, or at least regionally, but I'm pretty happy to import. And by doing that, we were able to draw in a wider basket of people, and we'll support those growers in Spain who really believe in trying to look after the soil and nature, and who look after their staff. For box schemes and local food businesses to be more successful, people need to get better at cooking cabbage, really. You go back to the beginning, people who delivered the first boxes, it was a pretty bold and radical step. Blew in the face of all the other sort of trends that were going around with supermarket shopping. Thank goodness they did it. It's important to have a close relationship with the suppliers. If you can't, we can't grow everything ourselves, but our customers really like to know who is growing it, that it's a human being, right? That there's a face and probably a family.
It became a nucleus of 9 or 10 farmers, and we're growing nearly 200 hectares of organic vegetables. Fundamentally, we're doing things that are keeping family farms in business, the feeling that you're all in it together.
They know that we are committed, that we're not going to next year go and buy off someone else.
Had a devastating effect on the country's beef industry and our export business, which it took decades to recover from. People watched these cows on television and knew that there was something unnatural about what was happening. We developed these black and white cows to be almost like machines for producing the maximum amount of milk. So you needed to give them high protein feeds. And the way to make cheap high protein feed was to use dead animals. That was the cause of BSE. And the animal feed industry in Britain had put pressure on the Minister of Agriculture not to label what was in animal feed, it just said protein. And so whether it was chicken droppings or cow's brains, it still said protein.
I was certainly more wary where I was getting my meat from.
Fairly consistent lack of trust really with the way that government looks after food.
It certainly stopped me buying a lot of ready-made and processed meat.
Suddenly you've got this people paying attention for the first time since, I don't know when, since living memory, to where their food came from. The cheap food that they were beginning to see as their birthright. Farmers markets seemed the natural way for people to get closer to the source of their food.
So 50, £1. £4.
And they were tremendously important for producers, for small farmers, for keeping alive people who were being edged out of the globalized food system. It was the savior of many small farmers.
Everything that is brought to the market and sold by storeholders is either produced in Hampshire or within 10 miles of the county border. It's amazing to see how much produce can be produced within a county. grill them. Beechcroft, we're a small family farm. It's mum, dad, myself that work on the farm and lots of family members. $2.64 then, please, Justin. I'm sure he can have a bonus sausage. Wonderful, thank you. We work so hard for our product to be really good that I'd like it to be appreciated by local people that sort of live near the farm, can appreciate what's grown close to their home, really. There we are. Thank you ever so much. Farming through the BSE years was really, really very difficult. Literally overnight, any market that farmers had for beef just dropped. It was an absolute crisis, especially with beef. It's not a quick turnaround product. It takes sort of 2.5, 3 years to get that animal to market. And literally overnight, for there not to be a market for that product was crippling. Farmers markets were a fantastic opportunity to get out, to speak to the consumer. If it wasn't for farmers markets and our small farm shop, then we wouldn't have actually been able to carry on, because as a small farm, we're not able to benefit from the economies of scale. So to be able to take our produce straight to the consumer without a middleman is just an absolute bonus for us.
We have got something a bit less mature. So this is about 2 years old. This one's about 18 months old. When we first started making cheese 12, 13 years ago, it was very small scale. Local farmers markets were the place to start. The overheads are very low. There you go, try that. Since then, we've grown sort of 15% every year, and now we're making about a tonne of cheese a week.
Oh, that's nice stuff.
Farmers markets are really important for consumer confidence. There's a need for people to want to come and meet the producers of their food.
You know everything's really fresh, you know everything's really local because everything's from Hampshire or, you know, just outside Hampshire, and it's been made by people who really seem to love what they do.
Since the horse meat scandal, our sales at farmers markets have gone up at least 10%. The consumers have definitely reacted. We're reaping the benefits, obviously being completely traceable.
I like the way you can talk directly to the producers as well. I've just bought a vegetable I would never have bought before, but was recommended it by the man who grew it. So you don't get that at a supermarket.
The nutrition's a lot better in something that hasn't been sitting on a shelf or a wagon travelling around for ages.
You come to market this on a Sunday afternoon, you can pick up some good bargains.
We hadn't, or at least at government level, we hadn't learned a lot from the BSE crisis. The government, under pressure from the National Farmers Union, decided not to vaccinate animals against this virus. They put in place this slash and burn policy of killing infected animals, and it had a completely devastating effect. Again, we had this incredibly costly scandal, which is still playing out in rural areas. It made farming much less viable.
After the foot-and-mouth crisis, there was a lot of television coverage of the true impact of hundreds of animals being burnt on great fires. The general public realised farming was something that they relied on much more than they were aware of before. There was a greater interest in food. There was a proliferation of food programmes. Foot and mouth, I think, was a major turning point in favour of sustainable and local food production. The local food delivery scheme grew out of that as an extension to farmers' markets, enabling more producers to take part, greater quantities to be distributed, a very wide range of produce, and more customers to be reached every single week. We delivered to around 180 customers a week. I would say almost half our customers have been with us for about 10 years. The produce we sell is mostly from Somerset, And that's an easy option really, because there's such a wide range of topography and climate in Somerset that it makes it easy to find a wide range of things. So we stick pretty closely to the seasons and pretty closely to stuff that's grown in Somerset. Most of our customers think that if it is sourced relatively locally, it has to be a good thing.
I phone on a Monday and it's delivered on Thursday or Friday. I value their friendship, kindness and efficiency. It's a nice thought that it's coming from local people. I can't get out to shop. And this is the back of beyond here by and large, and the nearest shop is 2 miles away. I love Somerset. It's local. It's available. That to me makes sense. If you've got good food around you, then buy it. If you've got good produce, get good food and good meals usually.
Morning, Mickey. Hot again, isn't it? Right, let's see what we've got this week. This looks like pak choy. There's a rather comforting feeling about buying food from your own locality from much smaller organisations. Free-range eggs that offer a much more personal service and who have an ethos that the big boys might not necessarily agree are that important. It's very important that relatively small-scale local food production continues alongside industrial food production, but if that was allowed to completely obliterate small and medium-sized businesses, we would lose a great deal from both our culture, our nutrition, our landscape. We've got a county-wide distribution scheme and have got a proven business model, and indeed has been replicated elsewhere, both within the county and outside. The future and the appeal of buying produce from an area close around you is going to become even more important in the future. Not only for little old Somerset, but for every community wherever they are in the whole world.
It's so important we reconnect to the land. We all know about foot and mouth, we all know about B2C, we all know the countryside was shut down. And that was a huge issue for farmers out in rural areas. But at the same time, there was a big issue for people living in city centres because health was, it's risen right up the agenda, whether it's obesity or whether it's diabetes or coronary heart disease. All these illnesses that are striking down young people straight through to old people, and things that we could actually help if we had a decent diet, if we actually knew that there weren't chemicals in the food that we're eating and we knew how to cook them. If we prevent people being ill, we're going to save the nation a lot of money. And if you grow your own food, you're active, you're eating good food, you feel the magic of being out here in the open air. So you are healthier. There are studies all over the world that shows that that is the case. So for me, this local food movement has to be one of the major focal points of public health in the future, because you can leave people to create healthier lives for themselves and their family. Let them have land to grow on.
The community allotment started in 2000, and since then we've been going from strength to strength in terms of the amount of growing space that we've been developing and the amount of produce that we've been able to produce.
I don't know the name, but this is from Iran. Smell it. It's a herb. It's a kind of the herb.
I like to try and grow a bit of anything really. Soft fruit. Lots of strawberries and raspberries at the moment. I like to grow a bit of variety, so I think I'm on 25 varieties of potato this year.
We're able to grow our own food rather than kind of go out and buy the food, which I think has a big impact on the taste.
And onion leaves.
The cooking has really developed by cooking outdoors and on site.
I just love all that colour from the beetroot leaves, all those
yes,
red
it's
bits.
lovely,
Just
yeah.
a bit of colour.
Lovely colour, lovely flavour.
People can join in, they can feel confident about harvesting crops at the right stage, about how to prepare them, and then how to make fairly simple, straightforward dishes, and then go and do that at home and feed their family.
I just think it's better food. I think it's sad that people don't know the variety of food that they could enjoy. I think most people live on broccoli, carrots and peas.
When you grow it your own, you've got that satisfaction of doing that and the ability to share what you've grown as well.
We've seen a real rise in local food and the interest in it, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. First of all, we've got to do a reality check. We've got to accept that it's still a minority market. And then we've got to try and persuade the powers that be, through our own actions, that you can live differently. I think if we're really going to make a difference in the next 20, 30 years, our investment should be in our schools. We should build on the good work that's already going on there. There's some teachers and parents who are, real champions, but we need to do more. And we need to help bridge that gap between schools and community. And once they've got the bug, they'll never lose it.
It's actually called, it begins with ch.
Chive.
Chive.
It's a lovely, safe space for them to be. There's so much to look at, so much to learn, so much to just eat and taste. Just being outdoors, being in touch with nature, working with the seasons is a really good way of living and eating.
It started off seeds in the soil. Then I planted this one first. I've learned how to be patient with plants. You get loads of potatoes.
What's really inspiring is to see unloved bits of land now turning into fabulous places like this where you can grow food for your own family and your own community. The more that we can think about what we can grow on our own doorstep, in the heart of our cities, the more we care about seasonality, the more we know how to cook things seasonally, the less likely we'll be flying stuff all over the place. I think we still need people who know how to grow on a larger scale. I think we still need alternative food outlets. But what we have ignored up to press is the role that local food and local food businesses can play in that bigger picture.
Trying to buy food from as close to the hospital as we possibly can. Initially I say anything from the East Midlands, then anything from the UK, and we will use stuff from abroad if we have to, but that's really the exception, not the rule. The thing that we're doing different here is actually we're cooking food from scratch. And we're operating seasonally, and we're going back to the way things were many, many years ago. So there's nothing revolutionary about what we're doing. It just is in the minority now. So we're actually taking in fresh produce at the back door and converting it into a finished product of the highest possible quality that we can. The main difference that buying local food is the quality of the produce and the known provenance. I know the quality of the produce is much better, which actually I think shows in the quality of the end product. I think if you're lying in a bed, you might not necessarily appreciate that, but I think most people would cheer us on for trying to invest their public money and their taxes back into the local community and the local economy.
You can taste the difference. Anything which is fresh, I think you can. And it's been lovely. I've really enjoyed it.
It was very nice, all the meals catering for our area, isn't it? It's nice that it comes from around here. Good for the local economy. It makes you feel better, doesn't it?
There is no negative impact in terms of buying British, buying local, Could you buy cheaper beef on the market? Yes, I could, but it would probably come from South America. It would probably be 3 times as tough, and we would probably end up cooking it for 4 times as long to make it edible. And once you go through the whole process in terms of its transportation, etc., there really isn't a great deal in it because the yield is so much better. And we have total confidence in our supply chain because we know every farm that supplies us. It may surprise people to know there are no national standards for hospital food. So anybody could supply anything to anybody, and believe me, it does happen. So it's a complete open, free market out there, which is rather odd when we're supplying and feeding the most vulnerable people in our communities. We have to plan this for the future, and that's where the mandatory standards come in, and that's where I think governments come in, and government departments who have the authority and actually could do something. I genuinely believe the whole industry could do it. It's a question of, having the will to do it, really.
We're trying to support small-scale sustainable farmers who struggle to survive in the food system as it currently exists. We're also trying to get more food growing here in the city. We have our own urban growing sites, and we've got a farm in Dagenham. We want to support small-scale organic farmers, but if they cannot find a route to market that pays them a fair price for their produce, they'll go out of business like a huge number of small farms have over the last 50 years. The way food is traded is as significant as the way it's produced. So we need to create another way for those farmers to trade, to find a route to market to our communities. That's why community-led trade is so significant. We work with around 30 farms directly. They know that we will buy their produce at a fair price. They have been able to develop their business on the basis of that, employ more people, and basically just be much more secure in what they're doing. Small farmers are the basis, the foundations of the kind of food system we need. I think that without growing communities, some of the farms that we've traded with, well, they wouldn't exist anymore. Some of them would have gone out of business. And it's not easy now. It's still really hard work for those farms to survive. But we're in it together, and I think there's a real sense of that. We're supplying about almost 900 households with fresh fruit and veg each week. We have 1,500 people come to the farmers market.
Thank you very much.
We've also created work here in Hackney, and we've also stimulated quite a number of other businesses that have set up food businesses that are linked into the market or to the box scheme. We drop off at local shops, community centres and art centres, basically people, other businesses that we can work in cooperation with. We face enormous challenges in the years ahead in terms of environmental degradation and resource depletion. The kind of projects that we're doing here need to play a significant and increasing role in that. It's not frivolous or niche, it's actually fundamental to us achieving a sustainable food system in the future.
We need to look much closer at the way we can produce more food in the city region as well as in the city itself. I think it's really important that we make feeding as sustainable as possible, and that means reducing the amount of food miles. If people understand where their food has come from, they will take much more notice about what they're eating. We're not going to ever feed the whole city in the way that an old city would. We've now concentrated so many people in cities that becomes extremely difficult. What we are doing, I think, is encouraging as much as we can people to grow their own food, even if it's in tiny pockets. We have probably more land being used for growing food than an average European city, certainly an average UK city. Sometimes we'll have to circulate land, and some of that land may become housing land, but nevertheless what we'll do is look for other free land. I'm also looking to see whether some of our parks can be used for growing food. Why are parks largely mown grass? Actually, they're a wonderful opportunity for people to learn about food growing. We are very serious about the importance of food, not just for people's health, but for the local economy as well. What's, I think, really encouraging is that restaurants like this are sourcing as much of their food within 30 or 40 miles. There's much, much better food culture in Bristol that is probably partly the result of fighting back what would have been an absolute disaster if we'd just simply gone down the corporate road with food. Local food is part of local culture. Every town and city should put food right at the top of its agenda because it becomes part of the pleasure of living. The best things that have happened in Bristol that come out of individual initiatives. Good local bakeries, for instance, producing real good bread. The local high street is hugely improved by having the individual specialist shops, the greengrocers, the butchers, the fishmonger. What's brilliant is that relationship they have with the food and where it's come from. Any leader of a city who thinks it's all about transport and planning and housing and all those issues is wrong if they don't think that food should be up there as one of the most important aspects of our living.
I think the local food movement's done an awful lot over the last 20 years. I think it's shown us the way forward. I think the pioneers that have grown the food, sold the vegetable boxes, created the market stalls, set up the farmers' markets, have given us a clear sign of where we should be going. It's given us confidence, helped us see an alternative economic model. Now the challenge is to see how we can scale that up and how more people can have access to good, healthy food.
I think there have been many inspiring, remarkable changes over the last couple of decades. All over Britain, there are groups of people coming together to produce food, and it's not marginal anymore. But because it's food, it's still seen as somehow not as exciting or sexy as technology or finance. But actually, food is where it's at.
The local food movement has penetrated a certain amount of the population. I think we've still got a huge step to go.
So one more to taste. Okay.
It's got to get right into some of the poorest areas for people to recognise that the most economical thing to do is to cook well.
Food is the focal point for changing the world, in my view.